Episode 73 of the Pilot to Pilot podcast takes off now.
Okay, my name is Harry Stewart. I'm Lieutenant Colonel, United States Air Force, retired.
Today's episode is brought to you by the ForeFlight Frequent Flyer Sweepstakes. It's extremely easy to file a ForeFlight, and every time you file and activate a flight plan, you're automatically entered to win prizes such as an iPad, subscription, Century, ForeFlight swag, and much more. Head over to foreflight.com/sweepstakes for more information and start filing with ForeFlight today. What is going on, Avination, and welcome back to the Pilot to Pilot podcast. My name is Justin Seams, and I am your host. Today's episode features Tuskegee Airmen Lt. Colonel Harry Stewart. Now, we could go on and on and on and talk about Lieutenant Colonel Harry Stewart forever, but I just want him to speak for himself. He has a very powerful story, the things that he had to go through and the adversity he had to face in becoming a pilot. And even after World War II and after the Air Force Reserves, how he wasn't able to be a pilot. The airlines wouldn't hire him because of the color of his skin. He has faced adversity his whole life, his whole career, and it's just a very, very powerful story. Avination, if you enjoyed this episode, please leave us a review on iTunes. You can check us out on Patreon. Patreon is where you can support the podcast. pilottopilot.com/Patreon. Special shout out to Jordan Martin. Jordan Martin is our Patreon of the week. So if you want to be the patron of the week, please check out our Patreon page. If you want to find us on social media, check us out on all social media tags with Pilot to Pilot. And if you want to leave a review, like I said earlier, go over to iTunes and leave us a review. Avination, I don't want to keep you any longer. Please enjoy this episode with Lieutenant Colonel Harry Stewart. Lieutenant Colonel Harry Stewart, thank you for coming on the Pilot to Pilot podcast.
Thank you.
No problem. I'm excited to have you on today. And the first question I asked everyone is, why aviation? What was the original inspiration for you to get involved with aviation?
Well, I guess it was the environment at the time there. I was born in Newport News, Virginia, and not too far away from the Air Force Base or Air Corps Base there at the time, Langley Field. My parents tell me that they used to put me out in the crib and the planes would fly over and I'd crane my neck looking at the planes and sort of coo at them as they're going by. Later on, the family moved to New York. That was when I was about 5 years old, to Queens. And we lived not far from a airport by the name of North Beach Airport in Queens, which now is better known as LaGuardia Airport.
Oh, wow.
But as a teenager, I used to walk over and just watch the planes take off and sort of fantasize about my being a pilot and flying the planes. At that time, North Beach Airport was both a military and civilian field. And they had aircraft like the Martin B-10 and that thing flying around the field at that time. And,
yeah.
Then around the time World War II was rearing its head there, I think they had some P-39s, which was, I guess they were the state-of-the-art fighters at the time there. That was around 1939, 1940, around 1940. And I used to see them flying overhead and flying around. And of course, even before that time, in the 30s there, I used to see the planes coming in from different parts of the world, like the DOX, that was the German Dornier, 12-engine aircraft.
Oh, my gosh.
12 engines. And, what else was there? There were, of course, the Pan Am Clippers used to take off from Flushing Bay. And I got a chance to see quite a few of those aircraft. And, of course, that was the day of the dirigibles also. I saw the Akron go overhead. I saw the von Hindenburg, and I saw the Shenandoah, all of those dirigibles at the time there. But they didn't last, They had some problems.
Just a little bit, right?
Yeah, that's right.
What was it about aviation that made you crane your neck, that kind of sparked your interest when you were a young kid?
Well, it was something that was new. It was different. And the idea of separating yourself from the earth, and doing something different than most other people weren't doing at the time there. And the idea in being in another venue, another perspective as far as the Earth is concerned. Also, at that time there were movies that were coming out. People like James Cagney and Pat O'Brien and those actors a long time ago who were playing the roles of great fighter pilots. And, I looked at those, and I said, I want to be a hero like those guys.
Yeah.
And Dawn Patrol and a lot of those movies like that. I think they affected a lot of kids my age at the time there. And of course, we had little aero clubs among us kids, and we used to build these balsa wood tissue airplanes, and we used to fly them, and we used to be in competition with one another, and that was the thing at the time. And of course, the magazines like Flying Aces that we were reading at the time there, everything was about this newfangled thing, this new airplane thing, and it just grabbed my fascination. Wiley Post, I think of, and Amelia Earhart.
Yeah.
Some of these German pilots. I think there was a fellow named acrobatic pilot by the name of Fritz Wendell. I remember his name.
Yeah.
It was exciting times as far as aircraft.
It was. Aviation was new. It was kind of not too far away from the first flight, and it was kind of an exciting time. Planes were getting built very fast and very different types of airplanes, and it was just really awesome.
That's right.
What was the path for you? So say like before World War II, you really knew you liked aviation. You wanted to get into aviation. Was there a path for you to get into aviation? Because I know it was different times back then, and I don't know what it would have looked like before World War II for you to have a career or even fly an airplane.
Well, that was, pretty much impossible at the time.
Yeah.
And the reason being is that I was not really acquainted with reality at the time. The reality being that being an African American is that there was a limited opportunity for me to get training and get into the field of aviation, much less seek employment within the field of aviation, especially as a pilot. Even in the Air Corps at the time there, where a lot of people, a lot of youngsters got their wings, is the Air Corps did not accept African Americans as pilot trainees. And it wasn't until a few months before World War II came along, about 6 months before World War II, that the Air Corps relented and says, yes, we'll go ahead and train African Americans as pilots, specifically as pursuit pilots or fighter pilots. However, it must be done on a segregated basis. So as a result, they built a field, and I hadn't gone to the service yet, but they built a field down near the town of Tuskegee, Alabama, and not far from a school down there built by Booker T. Washington called Tuskegee Institute, Tuskegee University, Tuskegee College. But anyway, they built this field specifically for the training of African American youngsters to become fighter pilots.
Yeah.
I went into the service, and I guess it was around, it was March of 1943, and I had taken the exam down in New York City for pilot training, and I was accepted, and I was then sent down to Keesler Field, Biloxi, Mississippi, just for indoctrination into the military, and I was there for 1 month, and from there on, I was sent up to Tuskegee, Alabama, where my time was split between a student at the university at Tuskegee there and out at the airfield as a student pilot.
Yeah.
Finally getting my wings out at the air base there, and then, after some more training in fighter aircraft, was sent overseas. But the experience down at Tuskegee was just a wonderful experience for a young kid like myself.
I bet.
Getting an opportunity that I could have never paid for at the time. There, it was only through the consequences of the wartime situation there that I was able to go ahead and take advantage of that opportunity.
So what was the original reasoning why the military wouldn't let African Americans be pilots? What was the reason that they would tell you if someone wanted to go to apply or someone really wanted to do that?
They would say, I think the word that they used, or the rationale that they used, is that we did not have integrated services.
Okay.
And there was no integrated, or there was no service that was available to African Americans, because there was no integration at the time. There was strict segregation. And until that time that they relented and said, well, we will build an airfield and we will go ahead and train the African American students as pilots, but it must be done on a segregated basis. So they were pretty straightforward. They didn't try to delude me or anything like that. They said, well, we don't have integration, so therefore we will not train African Americans at this time, until they relented, and then it was, as I said, strictly on a segregated basis. However, it had its ironies, because there was just no way they could go ahead and have something as large as a training base there and not have some form of integration. So
absolutely, yeah.
That's right. Yeah. The instructor pilots, they were all white.
Yeah.
That was in basic and advanced there. So I'm in the same plane with the white instructor pilots there. And,
I was about to say, how did they expect you to get trained in aircraft and not be integrated?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then, of course, that type of thing went all the way through, even as far as housing accommodations and all of those things there. There are times that they had to bend what they considered the rules there in order to function. And even up until the time that we went overseas, the greatest irony being that when we as a group flying P-51s escorting the bomber crews in the 15th Air Force, and they were the crews on B-17s and B-24s, the crews being all white and the escort fighters being all black. So that was an irony there.
Absolutely. That is definitely an irony. It's like, hello, integration.
Yes,
yeah,
right.
That's amazing. That's it's quite a different time than what it is now. And
it certainly was.
What was the environment like once they started I know that technically, like we said, it was segregated, but obviously there was a little bit of integration. What was that environment like? Was it hostile? Were they accepting, or was it kind of standoffish?
It was like a 8 to 5 type of thing, and from 8 o'clock until 5 o'clock, you're integrated and you're working all together doing something, and the 5 o'clock whistle blows and you go your way and they go their way.
Yeah.
And that was it.
What about the instructors when you were being trained? Did they expect that you guys would be able to pass, or were they kind of like thinking that this was going to be a failed kind of an idea that would never come to fruition, that might not even work?
I think it was a mixture there. I think that, there were some instructors who felt the latter, that it wouldn't work. It was an experiment that was either designed or built to fail. And others who felt, I think, that, they were rooting I think these guys should have just as much of a chance as anyone else.
Absolutely.
And I asked the question from some of the instructors later on when I came back from overseas. what made you come to Tuskegee as an instructor? I'm sure that you had to volunteer, not only as far as an instructor was concerned, but volunteered to go to a all black base to go ahead and train African Americans to fly. And I think some of them were candid with me and said, well, it was near my home, and it was a good opportunity for me to go ahead and be near my home and my girlfriend or my wife or my parents, that type of thing. And others, and they still, some of those still held on fast to their ethnic or their social beliefs as far as integration, segregation was concerned. But then there were others who were, probably from the north and probably from a different environment, who felt as though, gee whiz, I'd like to be part of this experiment, and I'd like to see it work, and I'd like to go down in history as knowing that I contributed to it. So it was a mixture.
Absolutely. I mean, obviously, you rose at a time when all able bodies were needed for help. It's like we needed everyone for the war. We needed everyone. Doesn't matter skin color, whatever. It's like, get on board, get in the plane, learn to fly. Let's go. It's like we got a war to win. We got a machine to stop. So it was definitely needed. Do you think that this would have happened? Maybe not as fast, but I don't know how to want to word this, but how far off do you think this was where they would have accepted African American pilots if it wasn't for the pressure of the war?
That's really hard to say.
Yeah.
I think the war really accelerated it. No question about it, and that's just hard for me to answer because I certainly don't think it would have happened when it did happen. And it would have been much later. But I guess with the civil rights movement, had it occurred, in the 60s and that type of thing, as it did occur there, that there would have been still a push for equal rights and equal opportunity there, and I believe it would have. I believe it would have come about without the war, but would have been a long time coming.
Yeah. What did your family react to when you were like, Mom, Dad, I'm finally going to do it. I'm going to go be a pilot. I've been selected. I'm going to Tuskegee to do this. What was their reaction for it?
Well, because Dad, he was sort of gung ho and felt as though, this is the right thing for you to do, and for your country and that type of thing. Mom being the regular mom there,
no, my baby's going to war.
I don't want my baby that's going to war, But anyway, I think that the big thing is, I know Mom, they kept me protected quite a bit from not only the hostilities of discrimination and that type of thing. We were living in New York, as I said, and it was a very progressive area compared to some other parts of the country there. Everything was integrated. We lived in an integrated neighborhood. I went to school with a mixture of kids of all races there. I guess it was a predominantly Italian neighborhood I lived in, and we all enjoyed the company of one another and visited one another's house. We all went to the movies together. Any restaurants, anything like that. There was a complete integration as far as that's concerned. So the hostilities of the South and the hostilities in the service was something new to me. But my parents tried to warn me of that. For instance, they said that when you head south and you cross what they call the Mason-Dixon line, which was the imaginary line that ran through a number of states in the South there, including Washington, D.C., and below that line there was institutional segregation. And they tried to tell me not what it was like, but just to be very, very careful. And, what I experienced was when I was headed down to Biloxi, Mississippi from New York. I was on the train with some kids from the neighborhood. They were neighbors of mine, hence they were of different races. Mostly of them were white there. But when we got to Washington, D.C., the conductor came back to where we were all sitting and pointed to me and said, "You'll have to go up to the front car. That's the car for colored people." And the kids that were with me says, "Oh, that's okay, Harry. We'll go up with you." And the conductor said, "No, you won't. You stay back here." And this is where we have the segregated policy there, the Jim Crow policy, and the colored people sit in that first coach up front there, and the rest of the white people sit back here. So it was not a shock to me because my parents had warned me that this would happen. And of course, my eye was on the prize, and the prize being I wanted my wings, and I wasn't going to interrupt or, for the sake of a principle or something like that, give up my chance to get my wings there.
Yeah, so you had your eye on the goal. You weren't going to let any trivial thing come up or any kind of anyone let that knock you off your path. It's like, I'm coming to be a pilot. I'm doing this.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's exactly right.
That's awesome. So obviously you're on the train, you're going there. What was their time in Biloxi like? Was it very similar to the Washington, D.C. experience, or because I know when you go to training, there has to be some kind of camaraderie that is created by everyone involved because you're all going through the same thing together.
Completely. Completely, segregated. Mm-hmm. And I was with a segregated group. And in fact, the group that I was with was destined to go to Tuskegee. They were all going to the what they call the college training detachment, and that was specifically designed, and it was no different than the rest of the Air Corps there. It was specifically designed for those kids that did not have a college education. And by sending them to a university, and in my case, our case, they sent us to Tuskegee Institute for 6 months for intensive training in physics, mathematics, chemistry, and different subjects like that, so that once we went over to the base and started our flying there, that we would have an easier time in acclimating or interpreting the subject matter that we were going to be exposed to.
Did white pilots have to do the similar training before they went to go get their wings? Okay.
Yes.
So once you were in Biloxi and I guess my question is, were you given every single opportunity and chance to be the best pilot that you could possibly be, or were there some differences between the white and African American pilots?
Well, as I said, we were completely segregated down in Biloxi, and it was strictly a base. And the time that we spent there, which was 1 month, to acclimate us to the military. So there, they were teaching us things like, how to use a gas mask, how to wear your uniform in a proper manner. Get your shots that you needed as far as the Air Force shots were concerned, and all of those type of things. And I didn't start any type of training or anything associated with the pre-aviation training that I would do until we got to Tuskegee.
Okay, so talk a little about that. What was the training like? What was it showing up in Tuskegee, seeing that airport, the base, and just knowing that you're getting ready to go do the dream that you had as a child and go fly? Yeah,
well, they had, of course, the school, like other colleges throughout the United States. I'm talking about white colleges there, had a contract with the Army Air Corps to give pre-aviation training to these fledgling pilots there. They called them pre-aviation cadets. And that's what we did. And everything was associated with what we needed to learn in order to make our transition into the flying regiment as easy as possible. So the nice thing about it, it was like I was being sent away to as a young kid to college. And I lived, on the campus there, and this was the same as throughout the United States with other kids, regardless of their race, being on a college campus like that. And 6 months, and it was just really, really, I guess you couldn't call it the rigors of war and that type of thing. Because, we had the weekend dances we could go to with the pretty girls on the campus there.
Yeah.
And, it was just like being, going away to college. The rigors really didn't start until we got over to the air base, which was 6 months after the college there.
Okay.
And there we started, of course, pre-flight, which again sort of tunes you up for the both the physical and mental rigors of flying there.
Yeah.
That takes place for 2.5 months, and then the dream comes true when you go to primary flying, which is the first taste of flying that you get. I had never been in an aircraft before.
Oh my gosh, that's crazy.
Wow.
What airplane?
Yeah, I flew the PT-19, which was a little different than most of the youngsters who came along before that and after that. Most of them were flying the PT-17 cadet bi-wing aircraft. But what had happened was that a lot throughout the country, they were having a lot of accidents, especially ground loops, and these PT-17s. And somebody talked the Air Corps into purchasing a new plane, the Cornell, which was a all plywood, low wing, 2-seat in tandem, inverted Ranger engine. I think it was around 200 or 250 horsepower.
Dang.
But the big feature about it is it had a very wide landing gear on it, and it was almost impossible to ground loop.
Yeah.
So they thought that this would be an answer to that problem of ground looping, but it wasn't. We only flew that plane for maybe about 6 months.
Oh, no.
And they went back to the PT-17. And what would happen, they had what was known as stages. And in the stages, they put up a high rope, like a high jumper, like a pole vaulter would use.
Yeah.
And the idea would be to fly as close to that rope as possible in landing, within a shortest distance you can behind that rope or in front of that rope, whatever you want to call it. But what was happening is the pilots were coming in and they were stalling too high in the air, and they'd pancake in on the ground there, and the oleo struts would come up through the wings there.
Oh, no.
So that was,
my gosh.
That's what happened. So
Jeez.
That was the end of that experiment.
That doesn't work too well.
Didn't work too well.
Yeah, so they fixed one thing, and then they had another issue coming up with that plane. Yeah.
But in my case, I got through that okay. I got through, they give you 20-hour checks that you have to check your proficiency to see if they felt as though you merit going on. And they have the 20-hour check, 40-hour check, and 60-hour check. And then you move on to the next phase of flying, which was basic. And the basic flying, I went to all-metal, fixed landing gear, enclosed canopy, seated in tandem, low wing, 450 horsepower, radial engine, Pratt & Whitney. And there the instruments were a little more sophisticated. The flying was a little more sophisticated, and it centered a lot on instruments, instrument flying, and other precision type of flying, formation, of course, and aerobatics. And that, again, there were 20-hour proficiency tests there. So I went through the 20-hour check, 40-hour check, and 60-hour check, passed that. And then you move on to advanced flying, or the advanced phase of your training there, which was the 86, North American 86.
Yeah.
Again, all metal, low wing, however, retractable landing gear, variable pitch propeller, 650 horsepower.
Oh, yeah.
All sorts of instruments. And,
yeah.
it was pretty much on par with a fighter plane.
Mm-hmm.
So it was your first introduction to really a high speed, really complicated fighter type aircraft. It even had 30 caliber machine guns there. And in the last phase of the flying there, we went down to Keesler Field, and we did have gunnery training and using the 30 caliber machine guns that they had fixed in the wing there for targets. And then there's the 20, 30, 40, and 60-hour check again. And if you got past that 60-hour check, you've made it.
Oh,
you got your wings, and I got my wings at the time, and got my second lieutenant bars, 19 years old.
No way.
And didn't know how to drive a car yet.
That's amazing.
And, of course, kid from New York, this happened to a lot of the kids from New York, because you didn't need a car in New York.
Yeah.
The rapid transit system, and, you could go any place you wanted without a car, with the subways and the ferries and that type of thing. So it wasn't until after I learned to operate got my wings, as I said, second lieutenant bar, that I learned how to drive a car.
That's amazing. Did you ever feel overwhelmed in training at all? Because obviously with no kind of, you're the first one doing this. You're the first one, you're kind of the test run. You're kind of like creating history, like you said earlier. Did you ever feel overwhelmed in what kind of the significance of what you're doing in this process?
Didn't feel overwhelmed, but felt, the pressure of, not only wanting to succeed, but, having to succeed.
Mm-hmm.
And for the community, for myself, and that type of thing, because we still were, and viewed from many aspects as stereotypes as far as the racial matters were concerned, and people who actually believe that, well, these guys really can't fly, they don't have the proper attitude, they don't have the mental capacity, and in some cases even said physically handicapped as far as that's concerned. But
it's mind-blowing.
It was all proven to be wrong.
Yeah, as we'll talk about later, when you show up and start saving people's lives.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's like, you're welcome.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah. How many people were selected for the pilot training versus how many people passed?
In the actual fighter pilot cadet corps there were, 932 pilots that graduated from Tuskegee, and of that 932, 5 were Haitians.
Mm-hmm.
And they were sent, and no question about it, because of the color of the Haitians there, and being a black nation there, they probably felt as though they would stand a better chance in training at Tuskegee,
mm-hmm.
along with other African-American students that were training there. So anyway, there were 532. However, the Army at that time had a couple of artillery units. And with these artillery units, they had these aircraft spotters, and they need to train these pilots to fly, to spot the accuracy of the artillery that they were using. So they trained them in the Cub. They trained them into the L4 aircraft. And they trained at Tuskegee also. Their training was not nearly as rigorous as that for the regular fighter pilots that they were training. But with that, if we count all of those that we had there, it turned out to be at 996 pilots that got their wings down at Tuskegee. Of that 996, actually 351 went overseas into combat. Out of that 351 that went overseas into combat, 81 lost their lives. Of that 351 also, 35 were shot down and became prisoners of war. And also of that 351, there were 7 what they call evadees. Evadee being a aircrew member or pilot that goes down in enemy territory and manages to elude the enemy and get back to his home base.
Wow.
But that was 7 of them, and you can imagine a black pilot going down in Central Europe, and getting back to his home base.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah, that is amazing.
All right, but they had to have the help. In a lot of cases, they had the help of the civilians who were pro-democracy.
Yeah.
They were working with the underground, and they helped these pilots get back home without
That's crazy. That's amazing. That's just an amazing story in itself that you could probably talk about for hours and hours and hours.
Yeah. Yes,
What was? Sorry, keep going.
I was going to say that and each one of them has an amazing story as to what they experienced and that type of thing. So you've got this book, Soaring to Glory, which is my book there, or the book by Philip Bandelman about me, but I'm just one of those not even 351 of those 996 that graduated. Each has their own story, their own experience, and some of the experiences are similar, but some of them are unique to that individual, to each individual. So that was it. But speaking about the numbers and going down, is I was on a bomber escort mission to Austria. It was one of my 43 missions that I flew. And what had happened was that intelligence before the briefing that we had before we took off on the mission there was that if there was a situation where the bombers looked like after they delivered their bombs there, they had safe passage back to their base there.
Mm-hmm.
Is you fighter pilots may take a small contingent of your fighters and send them on a fighter sweep while you're up in Austria there. And this is what has happened. I was part of a 7 plane group flying P-51s.
Mm-hmm.
We were on this fighter sweep, and the fighter sweep being going after targets of opportunity. We were up near the Danube, shooting up any barges that might be on the Danube. As far as rolling stock is concerned, shooting up any of the railroads, railroad trains, boxcars, engines there, and as far as rolling stock is concerned, any hostile situations that you see that you might engage yourself in. And of course, the big one is engaging enemy fighter aircraft. And the whole idea of this fighter sweep was to try to diminish the war effort that the Axis was putting up at the time there. But anyway, on this particular mission, we were near Wells Aerodrome, near Linz, Austria, not too far from the Danube there, and we ran into a horde of enemy fighters, Focke-Wulf 190s. Of the 7 of us, 3 of us got shot down.
Oh my gosh.
One was shot up. He made it back to friendly territory in Yugoslavia and crash landed there. The second pilot that got shot down was killed instantly. The third one, his name was Walter Manning from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. His plane was shot up pretty badly. He parachuted out, and when he alighted, a mob was on the ground waiting for him to alight, and they took him to a local jailhouse. 2 nights later, whether it was the same mob or not, I don't know who this mob formed, and they broke into the jailhouse and took Walter out. They beat him up pretty badly, and then they hung him from a lamppost. This was not unique, as this happened to a number of our pilots. And when I say our pilots, I'm talking about those that were flying, not just pilots, but aircrew members, flying with the Allied Air Forces, and this being the RAF, the RCAF, the Australian Air Force. What else was there? There was the South African Air Force, and there was depositions taken by people after the war, and these depositions were about these these aircrew members who went down and were executed by the local populace there. Not much talked about or anything like that, but when you think about it, you understand how that can happen. And of course, we were warned and told that, whenever you're escorting the bombers or, that type of thing, if you happen to go down, get away from that area that has been bombed, because the people are incensed and they probably lost loved ones and that type of things. And, there's no rationale when it comes to, trying to reconcile a loss like that. You're probably looking for revenge. But anyway, it was interesting because that mission that I was on, where Manning was lost there, where he was executed, was on April 1st of 1945, which happened to be Easter Sunday. 1945 also, April 1st is April Fool's Day. And it so happens that in April Fool's Day and Easter Sunday of 2018, the year 2018, happened to be Easter Sunday also.
Oh, wow.
April 1st, April Sunday. And I was invited by the Austrian government to come over to a commemoration that they were making for Walter Manning. And with their studies, and I have to, really praise the government very, very, very much, the Austrian government, because, they were contrite, about what had happened and what their citizens had done. And not only that, but I think it took a lot of moral courage for the government to say, our citizens killed this guy, and we're going to, as the best apology we can make is to try to commemorate and make an edifice to him there. And that's what they did. They built a edifice on one of the military bases there, and they had his picture that was engraved in copper, and a memorial to him. And they had a big to do, and just absolutely wonderful. So I did get
amazing.
back there, and it is.
That's a hard thing for a community to do, because obviously you need to accept what happened in the past. And I feel like a lot of them would want to not relive that and kind of look past that. But the fact that they were able to bring that back up and kind of reopen that wound and be like, hey, we did this. Like, this was war. We did this. We're sorry. We want to celebrate this and celebrate his life and you and what you've done. So I think that's really amazing by the government. So kind of backtrack a little bit, going back to the story of you flying those missions, there was actually a mission where you were able to shoot down 3 airplanes, right?
That was the same mission.
Was it the same mission?
On April 1st. Okay. Actually, I shot down 2 airplanes, and I was given credit for a third one. And this was the decision of the operations and intelligence as far as that third one was concerned. But I had, during World War II, you talk about victories and shooting down aircraft. A lot of pilots never saw the enemy plane that shot them down.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that you wanted to keep, a real swiveled neck, so you can look around and see in all directions there, because they could be coming at you from any directions there. And if you're not looking at that direction at the time there, that all it takes is just, one slug, and that's it, But anyway, I don't think these 2 guys, they were sort of flying wing to wing in a 2-ship tack there. And I got behind them, and I don't think they saw me. I hit the first plane there, saw pieces coming off, and the second one realized what was going on and started pulling in a tight turn to the right. But I anticipated that, and I got a deflection inside of him there, and pieces came off of his plane. Those were the 2, and at that time, I thought I saw some tracers come by, and I looked back, and here is this FW on my tail.
Jeez.
And he had me dead to right. I knew I was gone, because he was just in a perfect position, and that was it. But I don't know. I panicked, and I did the split S, and I guess I was at maybe 3,000 or 4,000 feet, something like that. And dove for the ground, trying to elude this guy there, and I started pulling in a very, very tight turn, very, very close to the ground, as tight as I could. And he was trying to evidently get inside of me there, and over-controlled. And as a result, he snapped, over-controlled, and went into the ground.
Oh my gosh.
And the intelligence and the people, 15th Air Force gave me credit for it, said, well, if he hadn't been chasing you and that type of thing, he wouldn't have gone in. So it's your credit, So that's the 3 I got. So
that's amazing.
Right.
So I got 2 questions for that. Well, the first one will be, obviously it's war. They're your enemy. But at the same point, you are taking a human life. Like, what's the thought process of that? Like, 'cause I know you have to be excited because you're doing your job. Like, this is what you're supposed to do. But like I said, at the same time, you're taking a human life. So how do you kind of deal with that?
Well, I guess I remember when I got back to the base. Of course, the adrenaline probably had just wiped me out. And it's quite a rush. I just can't think of a rush that I had before or after that, maybe in the one or other circumstances. But they gave us what we had when we'd come off of the missions, what they call mission whiskey. I don't know if you've heard of that.
No. Explain.
The intelligence, they felt as though the trauma of being up in the air there and the excitement that you can run into, it would be easier to go ahead and give the person 2 ounces of whiskey, which hopefully would just sort of calm them down a little bit, and put them back on a more or less even keel. And that's what I got when I came back. I got this mission whiskey that they had. But after the briefing and all of that was over, I went back to the tent, and I was sitting on my cot there, and of course I was thinking about what had happened.
Mm-hmm.
And then I started thinking about these other guys, and I said that could have been me. And I started thinking about, well, golly knows, I've got a sister and 2 brothers, 3 siblings there. I said, one of those guys might have had 3 siblings just like me. And I got mother and father, and I said, one of them probably got a mother and father just like me. And said, they'd be devastated if this had happened to me, that I met my demise like this, and I started feeling some pangs of guilt and that type of thing. And then I rationalized. I says, well, we were fighting under the same circumstances, is that he was fighting for his government and I was fighting for my government.
Yeah.
And he probably believed in what he was doing, and I certainly believed in what I was doing, and I just, chalked it up to that. That was my rationale, and I let it go.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's got to be a tough thing to do. And I mean, obviously, like you said, you were both doing what you believed in, and everyone that was involved, obviously I can't speak on this too well, but I would like to imagine that everyone involved knew the ultimate risk of what was going on. You heard about the stories, you've seen, like you said, you've seen your friends get shot down, you've seen death all around you. You knew that was an opportunity. So everyone knew what the ultimate risk was.
That's right.
Well, so the second question off that story is, all right, you just shot down these 2 pilots and then you realize these tracers are going by you. And you pretty much said that was it. You were accepting the fact that your fate was up.
That's right.
How do you think, how do you even get out? How do you even not just sit there in fear? How did you get out of that moment?
Well, I didn't sit there in fear. I mean, I reacted. I wasn't paralyzed, but I reacted, and I'd say more or less in panic more than anything else.
Yeah.
But I did react in favor of myself. I do remember my bodily functions. I mean, they left me because I think, under extreme duress and under extreme life-threatening circumstances, your body changes, and it says, well, all of those little ancillary, all of those little side issues that I'm taking care of in the body, I'm dropping them out. The whole thing is survival now.
Yeah.
And that's all you're left with. So, your bladder lets loose, and it's real trauma.
Your body has one objective, and that is to do everything possible to survive.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's an amazing story. What was it like when you landed and came back? Because obviously, like we talked a little about the whiskey. What were your fellow, everyone around you? What did they say? Were they praising you? Were they all high fives and everything, or was it?
Yeah, well, what happened? And of course, they wanted to hear the story, and wanted to find out, what was going on, and looking at you, of course, to see, how are you taking this? Mm-hmm. What is your reaction? And I guess they were vicariously projecting themselves into the story there as to, well, gee whiz, is this what it's like? Is that what I can expect? Or all that type of thing.
What did when obviously you guys were you somewhat segregated from the white pilots, right? Or were you living together with them on base?
Segregated with them completely. There were no white pilots on the base there, and maybe in the whole fighter group that we had there might have been maybe 2 or 3 white officers that were with the group. But as I said, that was the irony of having But that was it. So no, we didn't have any of the white pilots there. But I think the pilots, the bomber crews, I think they became, after a while, they became very appreciative of the job that we were doing in trying to protect the bombers. I know we had an enviable record. We had the smallest loss of bombers that we escorted than any other fighter group that was over there at the time. There were 7 fighter groups in the 15th Air Force.
Mm-hmm.
And the story is that the bomber crews were felt comfortable in seeing us escort them because
awesome.
they felt as though that
you got the job done.
Paramount
purpose,
we would get the job done, and we weren't going to go and arbitrarily leave them or something like that. Is that we were going to stick right with them right to the end.
Yeah, and that's kind of what we talked about, the irony too, of how maybe some people thought that you couldn't do this or you shouldn't do this, and then here you are. Maybe those same people, you are now saving their life and protecting them, and they want you next to you. So
exactly.
Yeah,
and I guess I think it's talked about in the book there. I think one of the most dramatic occasions was Christmas of 1944, and the weather closed in on the bombers coming back from their mission there. And I think it was 25 of the bombers had to be diverted to our field.
Wow.
And that's a crew of 10 on each bomber. So that's, I guess, 250 crew members there.
Yeah.
And they lived with us for the Christmas holidays, from Christmas through New Year's, and living in the same tents with us and eating the same food and having the same parties and drinking the same whiskey. And we got to be, extremely friendly, and I'm sure it changed the attitudes of, many people.
Yeah.
That were in the war at the time there, but it's an interesting chapter as far as that's concerned, and that was true integration there, from the heart,
Yeah.
Anyway,
it helped change the whole country. I mean, essentially, it was kind of one of the founding parts that led us to where we are today. So, I mean, it's an amazing story.
Yeah, I guess it takes me skip ahead a few years there and to 1949, and General Hoyt Vandenberg was the chief of staff of the United States Air Force at the time, but he wanted to resurrect a game that was in force prior to World War II, and that was the fighter gunnery meet competitions that the different fighter groups would have. They would send their top fighter pilots, maybe 3 top fighter pilots, to go into competition with each other within each of the groups there, and the top winners would turn out to be comparable to what the Navy calls now a top gun.
Yeah.
And Hoyt Vandenberg wanted to resurrect that, and this would be the first fighter gunnery meet that was held since World War II, or since the inception of the United States Air Force as an entity, rather than the United States Air Corps, which was under the Army at the time.
Okay.
But anyway, they selected 3 pilots from each group, and they met out at Las Vegas Air Force Base, now known as Nellis Air Force Base. And that was they used that as a hop-off point for going out into the desert there for their competition. And the competition was based on 6 events there. Gunnery at aerial gunnery at 20,000 feet, aerial gunnery at 10,000 feet, rocketry, skip bombing, dive bombing, and panel gunnery. And the events took place over a period of 6 days. There were 12 fighter groups competing against one another, 3 members in each group. Of that 12, they decided to break the group up into what they called the jet class and the piston or propeller-driven class. So actually, 5 of the propeller-driven groups were competing against one another, and 7 of the jet class were competing against one another. But anyway, to make a long story short, is at the end of the 10 days of competition there, the Tuskegee Airmen, what I call the Tuskegee Airmen, the black pilots, they won that first contest, the first Top Gun contest that the Air Force gave. So it is awesome. And 30 days after that, well, it was that took place in May of 1949, and at the end of June of 1949, that was somewhat a little over a month later, complete integration took place. They disbanded the black base at Lockburn Air Force Base altogether and sent all of its personnel to the 4 corners of the earth and integrated them completely within the rest of the United States Air Force. And that's where the true de facto integration began. And,
what was that feeling like when you know that it was finally accepted and integration was wholly accepted in the military and in aviation or in military aviation? What was that like for you, knowing that you were on the forefront of that? Was that a very proud moment?
Well, I'd say it would be it mixed emotions, and as I should say that it was decreed, and being a decree does not necessarily mean that people are accepting this within their hearts. You know?
Yes, gotcha.
So
that's a good point.
As a result, is that there were diehards who said, "I'll never accept this thing," and among the African American aircrew members and personnel, there were those who felt that, gee whiz, I don't believe them. I believe this is just a means to go ahead and make life more difficult for me and to take away what little rights I do have and that type of thing. But I will say one thing is the Air Force hierarchy, when they decided to do this, they said, we're going all the way with this plan and we're not going to accept any dragging of the feet or anything like that. And they did go on to, implement this and, let everyone know that
this is happening.
If this is happening, and if you can't abide with it, get out.
Yeah, here's the door.
Here's the door.
That's what they needed to do, though. I mean, obviously, like I said, different time. I don't understand that mentality because where we grew up, it's not. I don't know. It's just different for me, and I don't know how someone could think, especially when you have the track record of what you had and the missions of what you guys were able to do and the stories that you're just able to tell me and how well you guys did it. How you proved to everyone that this is possible and that you are no different than anyone else and that you do your job very, very well. And it's hard to believe that someone could even have pages and pages and pages of just what you have done and then they still can't accept it. It just blows my mind.
I use the expression Tuskegee Airmen, and let me say this for the benefit of the listeners, that the name Tuskegee Airmen was an acquired name. This was all took place within certain groups of black Air Force and Army Air Corps members, the 332nd Fighter Group, the 477th Bomb Group, and different support groups and squadrons and that type of thing. And after the war, and somewhere around 1972, a doctor by the name of Francis, John Francis, I forget his first name now, but anyway, he wanted to write a book. He did write a book. And he wrote about the experiences of the black Air Corps members in World War II. And for want of a name, he says, well, let's see. They all trained down at Tuskegee, so I'll call them the Tuskegee Airmen. And that name took effect.
It stuck, didn't it?
People just stuck, you know, and people use it today, you know, the Tuskegee Airmen. But actually, it was the group designations, military designations that we had. But I thought I'd go ahead and throw that in.
Yeah, no, it's interesting.
People wonder what is meant by the Tuskegee Airmen. You know,
it's funny to think that it was come up with after the fact. It wasn't kind of an immediate name that was given or just a name that was embraced or created by the Tuskegee Airmen themselves.
Right.
That's really interesting. Well, so obviously the war is winding down. The war is over. You guys just proved again and again and again that you're able to do this. What was next? I mean, I know in the book and what I read that you were not able to come back and fly for, say, Delta, United, American, or those kind of companies. Is that correct?
That is correct. And of course, when I got out of the service in 1950, it was the same old, same old. I mean, in the civilian life, the same problems that existed as far as the social element in the country was concerned was the same. Nothing had changed. And I say that not just only as far as many jobs and occupations were concerned, but the fact that I had acquired a skill, and that was as a pilot. I went and I applied with 2 airlines, and I was rejected by both of them. And one tried to hide the fact that they had it advertised for pilots for the airline, but denied that they were hiring any at the time. The second airline, the personnel officer or assistant personnel officer, whoever he was, noticed me, and the person that I applied with at the employment office alerted him to my being in the office there. And he came out, and pardon me, I guess he wanted to tell me his position and why the airline was not prepared to hire me. And of course, he used the rationale that hiring me would affect the bottom line as far as their profit was concerned. That passengers seeing me walking down the aisle and getting into the cockpit would lose confidence in the airline, and that type of thing. Well, I didn't buy it, but
not at all.
That was it. Anyway, that was it. But as time went on, I realized that, I don't know when. I believe that eventually the airlines would accept African Americans as aircrew members. But I said that could be a long way off. So I said I better go ahead and get a backup position. So I went back to school, and I went to New York University, got my degree in mechanical engineering, and I went up the route, the vocational route of engineering, and that's what I retired at. Well, I was very gratified, and things that happened subsequent to that, and I think of the most dramatic situation was a flight that Delta Airlines had. They were taking off, had a crew that was taking off from Hartsfield Airport in Atlanta to, I guess it was, I don't know, it was somewhere in Kentucky or Missouri, I forget. But anyway, if you looked into the cockpit there, you would see two African American crew members, pilot and co-pilot, sitting in the cockpit there. And I guess the most amazing thing, if you took another glance and you look, both of them were female. So that is
amazing.
That is amazing.
Yeah, that is amazing.
Right. So I once in a while run into some of those female pilots that are flying, black female pilots that are flying for the airlines. Also, I just got back from Oshkosh, and of course, I see a lot of people there. I go there almost every year. And then I just came back from, the Tuskegee Airmen, Orlando, Florida.
Okay.
And Tuskegee Airmen Inc., which is a organization that was formed by the Tuskegee Airmen after the war, but they were having a conclave down in Orlando there, and I was sitting at the table with three black generals that were sitting there. Two of them were female.
No way.
Yes,
that's amazing.
Yeah.
Like we said, different times, right?
Different times.
Yeah, different times.
Right. Yep.
I have a couple. I think I have like two more questions for you. One of them is about the disappointment of coming back from the war, knowing that you served your country very well. You did everything that anyone has ever asked of you. And then you come back, and did you have the expectation that things were going to be different? Or did you come back knowing that you're coming back to kind of what America was before you left?
Well, I didn't let my expectations run away with me. I didn't do that. And I always felt that if I could just present myself and present my case, and people could see me as I really am, rather than the fiction that they might have in their minds about me or something like that, is that I could prove my case there. But, in this situation, I didn't prove my case, but I still felt as though the case would be proven by somebody someday, and pretty much in the not too distant future. It may not be my day, but it would be, the day of kids that followed, in my footsteps there, which actually happened. So yes, it was a disappointment to me, absolutely. I mean, this is what I wanted to be. This is the life I enjoyed, the life up in the air, but it just wasn't my time. But it really feels good to see that it did happen during my time. And maybe it didn't happen to me, but I'm just as happy to see it happen to some others.
Absolutely. And I will say this, I just got done talking a couple weeks, maybe last week. I got done talking. He is 24 years old. He's from Jamaica, and he is an airline pilot at Delta Airlines. And I will,
how about that?
And I know exactly, right? And I will strongly attribute his success to what you did in the past, and that the sacrifices you made and the conversations that you had created, because you went into these interviews and you went in to go show yourself, and that had to create a conversation within that airline. And that helped press this to the future. This helped press this to become into fruition later in life, and what you did and the sacrifices you made. And I know, like you said, you're disappointed that you weren't able to become that airline pilot, but what you did and the sacrifice you made has led to the future generation. And like I said, a 24-year-old African-American from Jamaica is a Delta airline pilot. And it's unbelievable. It's an unbelievable story, and I can't wait to share it, but it's amazing. And I thank you for that. It's unbelievable.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. It's
All
great.
right.
And my last question for you, this is the last question. I love the Tuskegee Airmen movies. I've liked both of them, the two that I've seen. How accurate
I'm
are
going to
those?
answer you right before you even ask me.
All right.
I know what you're going to ask.
Yeah.
It's Hollywood.
Yeah.
And, Hollywood, it's a docudrama.
Yeah.
And it's 5% documentation and 95% drama there. So
absolutely,
a lot of it's it's the last one was the Red Tails, and that was what's his name, the Star Wars guy.
I'm drawing a blank too. I know what you're talking about.
He produced Star Wars.
Yeah,
the producer.
Okay.
Anyway. Star Wars, it's got a lot of fantasy and all that sort of stuff. And that's what he did as far as the Red Tails are concerned. The byline, the story was just ridiculous,
Were you watching the movie just like, what? When did that happen?
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's right.
Who's that?
But I will have to say this. Is that after those two movies, that was the HBO movie was the first one, the Tuskegee Airmen, and then the second one was the Red Tails.
Yeah.
After those two movies, they were shown around the world. And then people came out of the woodworks who had said, we had never known this to happen. We didn't know that there were the blacks flying like this during World War II,
That's crazy.
And I think the credits and the notoriety that the Tuskegee Airmen got had a lot to do with these films.
Yeah, I would agree. Obviously, I'm young, and when the first movie came out, I watched it and I loved it. I'm sure I wasn't alone in finally figuring out like that's how it happened.
The first one was more accurate, I think.
Was it
the Tuskegee Airmen? Yeah. It was more accurate, but. The second one, the guy was flying on a mission there, and he looks down and he sees this girl on the balcony, and
a love story.
All of a sudden, it's a love interest from the air,
That's not how you met your wife? What the heck?
Right.
Yeah. Like that would happen. Yeah. That's wild. Well,
yes.
I appreciate you coming on, and I appreciate you being very open and answering these questions. And just your story is amazing, and it is one that I'm truly, truly, truly thankful for you to come on and share. And I'm very humbled that you were able to share that with me. It's amazing. Like I said earlier, you paved the way. You paved the way for other pilots to do what you wanted to do. And I know that you weren't necessarily able to take your career in aviation to where you wanted it, but you have helped open those doors for so many people, and they are internally grateful for you and what you've done. And it's just amazing. And I'm so thankful for you for what you did and what you've done for aviation. It's amazing.
Well, thank you. And don't forget Philip Handelman,
Absolutely.
And this is both Soaring for Glory.
That's what I was going to be my next. That was next up.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. If anyone wants to buy the book is Soaring to Glory, a Tuskegee Airman's firsthand account of World War II by Philip Handelman. And it's got some good reviews. It's got 4.8 out of 5 on Goodreads. So I highly recommend getting it. And I was actually sent 2 books to give away. So we're going to be doing a giveaway of those 2 books.
Terrific.
So I know, I'm excited. It's going to be fun.
Okay.
But I appreciate you coming on, like I said earlier, and I'll keep you updated on when this is coming out. And I'm just so thankful for this and so thankful for you sharing your time.
Thank you ever so much.
Have a great day.
Okay, you do the same. Bye-bye now.
Bye. Avination, that is a wrap of episode number 73 of the Pilot podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, please share this with everyone you know. The story of Tuskegee Airman and Lieutenant Colonel Harry Stewart is just an amazing one, and one that just needs to be shared with everyone. I don't want this history to ever die, as Tuskegee Airmen played a huge part in World War II. So Avination, please share this with everyone. Check out our Patreon page, leave a review, and I look forward to sharing next week's episode with Marlon Days. Marlon is a 24-year-old Jamaican Delta pilot. Yeah, that's right. Mainline Delta pilot. He's the man. Looking forward to sharing that episode. Avination, have a great day and happy flying.